o'clock.
This special planning and zoning meeting is called to order at 6 p.m. I'm going to call roll. Ishmael Harris.
Here.
Patrice Parsons. Here. Judah Ross. Here. Christy Koch. David Barrow.
Here.
Ashley Henson.
Here.
Gary Moss.
Here.
Thank you. Item number 2, citizen comments. We have no citizen comments at this time.
All right. Good evening. We have a couple of administrative items that we need to outline first for tonight. First one is going to be the person to run tonight's meeting. So I'll let y'all decide on that.
Are we not voting on the chair tonight?
We will. We just need
Oh,
somebody
somebody to run the meeting.
to
Got it.
administrate the meeting for this evening. Then we'll vote on the chair and vice chair.
Yes, so we'll take a motion to elect who will host tonight's meeting.
I nominate Ishmael, please.
Hearing no other nominations, we'll vote on the nomination for Ishmael Harris conducting tonight's meeting.
Patrice Parsons.
Yes.
Gary Moss.
Yes.
Ashley Henson.
Yes.
David Barrow.
Yes.
Ishmael Harris.
Yes.
Judah Ross.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Next will be the to elect the chair for the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Can I sit here to preside or?
Sure, however you want to sit.
Okay. All right. Now we are on to item 3B, consider action to elect the planning and zoning, oh, sorry. No, was that right?
3A.
3A, excuse me, sorry. Item 3A, consider to elect the planning and zoning commission chair, presented by Doug Haggerty. And he did that, so. Ask for a recommendation, right?
Yes,
Okay.
same as
Do we-
what we
same
just
as-
did.
Right. Do we have a recommendation for chair?
Yes, Ishmael Harris for chair.
Do 3B?
Yeah, I thought we already did this, yeah, so it's 3B.
Oh, okay, that's what I figured. Okay, sorry.
No, you had to, you're correct. You had
So,
to have
right,
somebody
we-
run the meeting. Now you're about to elect a chair. Once you elect a chair, then you're go. You're right, you're absolutely right.
I nominate Ishmael Harris to be the chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Do we have any other nominations?
I nominate Judah.
Do we have a second for Judah?
I'll second for Judah.
Okay, so we'll take a roll call vote on this item, and we ask that for the vote, you just state the name of the person that you're wishing to vote for, and then we'll collect the votes as necessary.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just have one question. Like, we have two very qualified candidates in my mind. They have shown leadership skills, they've shown camaraderie, they have the ability to ask questions and to challenge people. But like, why do they want to do this?
I mean, we quite frankly just have to have a chair. It doesn't necessarily.
No, why do they want to? I want to hear from them.
Oh, why do they want
I
to?
want to hear my fellow commissioners on why they want to be chair so that I can be educated and have a vote.
That is perfectly fine. You guys can discuss and give your statements or points for wanting to be chair.
Judah, I'll give you the floor first.
Thank you, Ish. I think we're in a critical time right now for Planning and Zoning Commission, as well as for the city, where there's obviously a lot of changes that have happened and a lot of changes that are going to happen. And I think there's many qualified people on the board to fill the role. I believe my experience, my knowledge of the industry and of planning, as well as my ability to build relationships with people throughout the city would make me the best candidate.
All right, well, I would say, scoot over here. This is my 4th year on the planning and zoning. I was here when we kicked off the B3 zone, the project. So I've been here through a lot of the heartache, the growth, the understanding. Over time, I've developed a rapport with the citizens. There are quite a few citizens that have come in here that I've ran into in the public that appreciate my opinions. I'm a lifelong citizen. I have a lot of concern about the growth of Bastrop in the right direction. Plan on retiring here. Hopefully my grandkids will be raised here. But just my experience, my concern, my love for the city, I feel that I'm the right person for the job. I'm going to do it with my heart and passion. It's not a personal gain, it's a city gain, and that's what I'm here for.
And just to, let you know how this is going to go, because this is an administrative item, it only will require a simple majority vote amongst the members that are present in voting. So since we have 7 here, 7 here today, the simple majority will be 4 of the 7 for electing the chair.
And if y'all will please bear with me, because I'm going to have to document who votes how. I said if you could please bear with me, I'll be documenting who is voting for whom. Okay, Patrice Parsons.
Ishmael, please.
Gary Moss.
Ishmael.
Christy Koch.
Judah.
Ishmael Harris.
Ishmael Harris.
Judah Ross.
Judah Ross.
David Barrow.
I made him do that, now I have the last vote.
Second to last.
Oh, good. Okay. I vote Ishmael, please.
Ashley Henson.
I'll vote Judah.
Right, so that makes 4 for Commissioner Ishmael Harris, who has now been elected as the chairperson for this Planning and Zoning Commission.
You now get to call for a vote of the vice chair.
Now we're on to item 3B. Thank you all for your support also. Item 3B, consider action to elect the Planning and Zoning Commission Vice Chair.
I'd like to nominate Judah Ross.
Get him a Coke.
Ashley, you can say Ashley. Seconded.
All right, so Patrice Parsons.
Judah.
Ashley Henson.
Judah.
Gary Moss.
Judah.
David Barrow.
Judah.
Ishmael Harris.
Judah.
Christy Koch.
Judah.
Judah Harris. Judah Ross, sorry.
Judah.
Thank you.
And thank you.
And Judah Ross will serve as your vice chair of this Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you. All right, on to item 4A, workshop, discussion and workshop on the elimination or amendment of the grid street requirements in the B3 Development Code, submitted by Sylvia.
Good afternoon, Commission, and thank you for humoring my bounce back. We're going to do it, we're not going to do it today. So one of the items under consideration is going to be the Transportation Master Plan as we talk about grid streets and how that relates into the B3 code and some of the what I'm considering major pain points or unintended consequences in the code as we adopt it and as we move forward. This picture, and we'll touch on it again, is an excerpt taken from the B3 code, and we're going to go through some discussion. And the grid system is very much like the human anatomy. Those red areas are called arterioles, much like a major artery in the human body. The blue areas are called collectors, and they can be major and minor. 2-3 lane type of streets that are really typically meant to empty areas, and the white are known as local streets, or for us, grid street patterns and block patterns. The transportation system is part of our comprehensive plan. Everything must roll up into that comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan is required by state statute, it's required by the city charter, and when we are going to court, if we get sued, the first thing they always ask is, how does this relate to your comprehensive plan? So we are going through some transportation plan amendments. We are working closely with CAMPO, the Capital Area Metro Planning Organization. We're working closely with the county to make sure that our plans are aligned. Not surprisingly enough, I will tell you today they are not aligned. We work very hard, but for example, the area off of Lover's Lane, when we did the last development agreement with the movie studio, that realigned where a bridge should have crossed the Colorado. That now doesn't match the Campo plan, and that now doesn't match the county plan. So when we had our leadership summit a few months ago, there are some overlay areas that we have to bring into alignment. When we don't follow the comprehensive plan and we don't take right-of-way, we don't exact right-of-way as required, TxDOT may make us pay for that right-of-way later on, and or things get very expensive for the city when we do have to go get that right-of-way to go build a road. It's better to do it during a particular process that's outlined in the statute, specifically in plating process or through a development agreement. Very few times where we can get it by right for the city. Other than that, we're going to have to enter into negotiations with the property owners. That's an expensive proposition. Our water and wastewater treatment plan, all of the right-of-way we're needing to acquire has, my goodness, that number is a lot bigger than we had previously planned to acquire. So transportation is but one component. We talk about a quality of life. We talk about those things that lead to reduction in traffic. Obviously, nobody likes to be waiting behind a red light. Nobody likes to be waiting behind a line of cars. It's not safe if the street isn't wide enough or the speed limit isn't set, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're going to talk a little bit about different modes of transportation. You hear it often referred to as a multimodal plan, whether that's walk, hike, bike, some ADA accessible areas, that's a car, different modes of transportation. So in the B3 code, we have something called block types. This is, again, a specific example taken out of the B3 code. So it is a gridded network of streets formed by small neighborhoods, I guess I should say. And I'm going to keep touching back to authentic Bastrop because the foundation of the B3 code, we talk about authentic Bastrop. And I'm going to give you specific examples where our own authentic Bastrop is not a block type system. We're going to get into some very complicated discussions as we talk about financing and infrastructure costs later on. When nobody's making a decision today, and I'm sure you're going to have many questions for me to bring back. But we need to get sort of the hierarchy out of the way so that we can begin to have discussion. So our grid street requirement today can go from 330 to 720. The vast majority of our place types require a 330 grid network. That is 330 feet by 330 feet in a traditional neighborhood development. Traditional neighborhood development is really carried out through most of our place types. And I see Ms. Henson writing frantically. It's okay, I'm going to get to a schema. Again, this is the map we're going to keep referring back to. Arteries, collectors, and then grids. So To understand the schema of how we get through the B3 code, you first have to understand the place type. In traditional zoning, it would have been called a zoning district. What zoning district are you in? That is now called a place type. We have added a layer called a character district. In traditional zoning, that would have been called an overlay district. In my old hometown, we have something called an island overlay district. It is a residential district, but on top of it sits specific character types. You can't put vinyl siding, your colors have to be coastal in nature, your coverings for the house and the roof have to be specific types. So we call those character districts in our B3 code. Then we go to development pattern. This is a traditional neighborhood development. We have cluster development. So for example, behind the Buc-ee's, where we have lots of trees, we want them to save those trees, and so we are trying to encourage cluster development, meaning you can group things really, really, really tightly together so that you can keep the trees and keep minimal and less impact to the overall environment. This one specifically, the example that I'm using is 1407 Main. It is a P3 neighborhood in the Old Town Character District of a traditional neighborhood development. The grid requirement is 330 by 330, 330 feet by 330 feet. You cannot have a max block perimeter more than 1,320, meaning all 4 lines that form that grid cannot be greater than 1,320. So remember what I said, traditional neighborhood development. This is 1407 Main. When I pull that grid system up, and I'm here, pardon me because I don't have any glasses on yet. When I pull this up, this is between Buttonwood and Cedar. So we talk a lot about trying to keep authentic Bastrop. How many of you would agree that this neighborhood is authentic Bastrop? Yes. Okay. This doesn't meet the block requirement. Today, I'd have to punch a street out between Buttonwood and Cedar. Now, there's some pros to that. You're going to slow traffic down. You sure as heck are going to slow traffic down because you don't have a chance to accelerate, right? So there is that. But it is going to become a very, very choppy proposition. We talk about the number of road miles it's going to take to maintain, because when those are built, those are then dedicated to the public. That is now becoming a city maintenance. We then talk about drainage. All of those things, impervious cover, lead to greater drainage requirements. We then talk about street design and street capacity. The greater the grid, the greater the property. We don't have lot size restrictions anymore. In traditional zoning, you would have had a maximum density amount. You would have said 4 units an acre, 10 units an acre, et cetera, et cetera. We don't have minimum lot size requirements. So if a developer were to come in and buy out this block of homes, you could subdivide these lots into pretty small chopped up pieces and put up a neighborhood of tiny homes. We can argue that that is perhaps okay, but I'm going to keep going back to what did we say was authentic Bastrop. This, what we said here at 1407 Main, was what everybody considers traditional authentic Bastrop. Traditional authentic Bastrop, we talked about relieving the lot sizes because some of these homes had rear garages that had the granny flat. They were typically servants' quarters. They were typically pool houses. So you have a multiple of dwelling units on the properties. Great. No disagreement in that. The problem becomes when you don't have a minimum lot size. The amount of property you can put in a grid system network like this becomes a number that gets higher and higher and higher. And we have to talk about the obvious. This is existing infrastructure that's already under the ground. Do we have the ability to bring that all up to speed when we begin to do these things? So we talk about the block requirement. The maximum block requirement is 1,320 feet. This one is 2,289 feet. So again, it itself doesn't meet the requirement. So if we're trying to build Bastrop, we're not building the Bastrop that we recognize. What are we building? And that's the question that we need to consider as we move forward. I think we know what the intent was. It's the execution of that intent. Now we have added densities that I don't believe anybody was aware that we were going to add within our neighborhoods. So examples of grid system streets. I'm trying to work off of 2 PowerPoints here. So here's the place types that we talked about. P1 is more your rural section. If I were to go to old zoning from before, I'm going to say this is farm rural. This is the 5-acre lots, 2.5-acre lots that are usually in your periphery. And once they get annexed into the city or brought into the city in one way, shape, or form, they usually come in as farm rural or your lowest density. And that's normally going to be a P1 or a P2. Larger area developments, lot sizes that are more than 10,000 square feet. You've got some room, you've got some elbow room. These are more country-style villas. You get into the P3 and P4, and that's your normal neighborhood. That's what you see all along Main. That's what you're going to see on Buttonwood. That's what you're going to see on Fayette. That's what you're going to see on Pecan, Wilson, all of the streets. That's your normal traditional block. Those lot sizes vary. That's the beauty. I think that is probably one of the things of authentic Bastrop is you have a large lot, you have a small lot, you have a 1930s bungalow, you have a 1950s Rambler, you have a 1970s ranch, and you have a 1990s modern, and that's all mixed in. Some of those things are what make a neighborhood seem livable. It's normal people living there. It's not a McMansion throughout the areas. And that's my fear, that what we've created in our block sizes and what we've created in our no lot size requirements within the B3 code is going to allow McMansion type developments. There are some ways, that we control that in the code, and that's through impervious cover. Right? We don't allow great impervious cover numbers, but 60% isn't a hard number to meet. It becomes harder to meet when we don't allow parking in the front layer and we force the parking in the back, but all of that concrete or cover to get to that back area then begins to have this almost impossible to reach, impossible to maintain affordability and buildability on the lot. P3, P4, P5. We go to EC, which is Employment Center, and that was a last-ditch effort during the writing of the code as they talked about needing some flexibility, specifically for the industrial park, the EDC industrial park. And you'll hear Trey come up and talk about a replat that we're going through in that process that doesn't fit the normal process. Our own process doesn't fit the process. You're going to hear Trey walk through that process. This was the code's attempt at a PDD. The problem with that is an employment center, our place types are indeed zoning designations. They are base zoning. You still can't do spot zoning. You can't do spot zoning without the PDD instrument. So we put in a PDD imposter, for lack of a better word, and expected that EC to be able to be recreated in other areas of the town, and that's just not how the code is written. It wouldn't have allowed it. So we put in an attempt, but when you go to execute, it doesn't execute. It's a fatal flaw. So I wanted to give examples of P2 rural. I wanted to give examples of all of the place types so that we can see the real world impact to what the code says. P2 rural, we talked about larger. This is Piney Ridge. This is Piney Ridge to Laura Lane. So these homes right now have a total block perimeter or a total block length of 1,400 feet. So they themselves already don't match the 740 max. So again, if I were to buy 3 or 4 lots in here and I want to build, I can't build what's there. I can't build what's in the built environment. A few meetings ago, you guys approved the non-conforming use, which says if I drop a pin, I should be able to do what's around me. But that's if something went away. I already had a something. If I'm trying to do something new and I buy a lot because I can subdivide, right? I don't have a minimum lot size and I can subdivide. I'm still going to have to meet a block requirement that doesn't match the built environment. So if I'm going to build in Piney Ridge and I buy 2 lots, let's say, side by side, and I can put in X amount of houses that looks different than the built environment, I don't know that the neighbors understand what's going to be able to happen around them. And then add to that the block requirements that are built, there'll be a new street and some new connectivity within Piney Ridge. Not arguing Piney Ridge probably needs more exits. We have fire safety concerns. We've talked about that at prior zoning conditions, but I'm just trying to state the obvious that if we're going to put things in the code, they ought to make sense. So we're going to go back to P3 neighborhood. same thing, total length from Buttonwood to Cedar, 750 feet. Cedar to Main and to Water, that one is 400 feet. So this block requirement here does actually meet what should be authentic Bastrop. And so if you can imagine this density right here recreated in this entire area, and that is what the B3 code is required of us today. We talk about roads, and we talk about connectivity, and we talk about letting off the gas, right? We make the analogy of if there's 5 lanes at HEB, I'm going to go into this lane. If this one has too many people in it, I get to go in this lane, I get to go in this lane, and I get to alleviate traffic through volume. I didn't alleviate the traffic, I just moved it. And I think just like the HEB example, the B3 code left a lot of things unequal. And by that I say, if I see too many cars in the HEB parking lot, I'm doing DoorDash a favor or curbside. I'm not going into HEB. Same thing, if I'm shopping for a house and there's a lot of cars perpetually and I cannot get out of my driveway because people have started to go down this street to get to this street to get to this street, I'm probably not going to want to buy in that neighborhood. That's the reality of it, especially if I have small children. Add to that, we said the houses needed to be articulated closer to the front. So we said, no parking in the first layer, you got to park in the last layer, you got to bring the houses up to the front, you've got to have a transparent fence. How does that equal with more traffic along more street? Those two things do not equal. So we've got to figure out how we make that work. Does it make for a beautiful streetscape? Sure it does. It does. You can go down and you can see the houses that are closer and close to a sidewalk and have a big tree in front of them. That's great. But again, I tell you, when you don't have a density requirement, how many of those trees are going to survive if I'm looking at a bigger ROI on the profitability of that lot? You can see Pearl River, not a lot of trees are going to survive. So we have to get back to the fundamental, what is it that we intended to do, and marry those things. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Same thing, we go to P4. This is Pecan from Mesquite towards Poplar. There should be a connector there at 550 feet from Mesquite north, and then a connector from Pecan to Highway 95. That's a 3,900-foot perimeter.
We're on a different slide.
Oh. Sorry, I clicked too quickly, sorry. Same thing. What we have in our code doesn't match existing built environment. And I get it. This was an aspirational code. This is where we were trying to get to. This is what we want to become. But again, I ask the question, are we sure? Do we really know the implications of that? Now we're at P5. P5 core. This is Jasper to MLK, and this is Jasper to the Highway 71 service road. This is already a 3,350 foot perimeter, 3 times what the stated perimeter in the code would be. So again, this would need to be chopped up some more in order for this to match the existing B3 code. This is employment, EC, Employment Center. And we're going to talk about this. This one, again, is a little bit special. It has no min and no max. And this was thrown in toward the end of the code creation and only to address the industrial park. So let's talk about some grids. So this is Burleson East. The picture on the left is under the B3 code, how many streets would have been required in that development. And when I say street, it has to function like a street. It has to have a street, it has to have a curb, it has to have a gutter, it has to have a sidewalk, and it has to have a tree. Burleson East, does it make for a beautiful streetscape walkability area? Yes, it does. There's no denying that there's some beauty in trees and sidewalks and being able to walk that. Do we accomplish the same with the picture on the right? That is the negotiated Planning Commission City Council where the pink is sidewalk, also has to function like a sidewalk.
We have a question.
Oh, sorry.
One quick question on the grid through the development. Are those city maintained or developer maintained?
City maintained, the one on the left. City maintained. And so just again, from a practical standpoint, I always like to say planners never execute. They plan. They've got their head in the cloud. That's why they're planners. That's why we hired them. They're meant to do those big picture items. But there has to come a point in time where we execute. I will tell you, there was not one street superintendent on staff when this was created. And I use the example with the prior mayor and the council that I didn't want to have Target or Walmart or whomever that is, whatever big box retailer or Kohl's or whoever is going to go in that shopping center, call me and tell me that sales are down because the city has failed to maintain their street. Because we have a mix of traffic along those streets. But we did not take into account a change in the street design. We didn't say these type of streets need to be concrete. We didn't say these types of streets need to hold X amount of traffic. A street is a street is a street. There are street design criteria, but with the traffic that these are generated, we didn't think about maintenance agreement, who should do it. It should function like a street. I should be able to circulate through that and go through. How many of you know where the Chick-fil-A is? How many of you wait in line through that Chick-fil-A and come around and you make the turn at the bank and you go right to come back around Academy? Imagine that street. Street in front of the bank and Chick-fil-A, that's a street. When you turn into the shopping center and you're heading toward Academy, when you make that right and you make that right, that's also a street, and it should be a street, sidewalk, and trees under the B3 code, okay? You finally get to the sidewalk connection right at Garcia's Mexican restaurant. You do get to a sidewalk and you do get to some trees. All of that is meant to function as a street. So you already have cars zipping through there to avoid, because Blakey's not built, to avoid having to go all the way around 71. They cut across that, they come around, and then they come up Edward Burleson. So I'm going to speed bump them. I'm going to have to maintain them. And what we said was intended for pedestrian safety. How much safety have I really created in that scenario? So the item on the left, the blue over on the left-hand side, this is Burleson, and this is 71, I believe, if I'm not turned around. Nope, I think I'm turned around. 71 Burleson. This blue street is what would connect to Wagon Wheel, which is at the settlement. There is another tract of property on the other side of that. We lovingly call that the Rosanke tract. That one is under development as well. These two are probably going to be your next PDDs. No, not probably, will be your two PDDs that come first. And I like to call them B3 light because their intent to meet the B3 in terms of sidewalks and connectivity and trees and streetscapes and those things will be met. The Rosanke tract is going to be multifamily. Our goal, when we go back to the comprehensive plan, is quality of life and moving traffic. We're making sure that these connection points are made and they will move traffic. Now, some of the agreement with this one, the proposed agreement, is that it is it's a public street, but it's privately maintained. Because again, I don't want to argue with the retailer that their sales are down because we didn't maintain our streets. So this is Pearl River. This is the scorched earth area. This is a beautiful example of what the B3 code would do, and you see a great variety of grid streets. You see the buildings articulated to the front, you see parking, you see new trees, because if you look on the site, there are no trees anymore. You see new trees, and they'll pay into the tree fund because they can't possibly put back as many trees as they took off. So from a traffic perspective, I'll be able to turn on 71, I'll be able to make the turn, I will be able to get back out, I'll come up Blakey toward the back, and then get out. But I beg the question again, what solution did we really solve if I'm trying to solve the solution of pedestrian and traffic mix? This is all apartments. This is all apartments. And so I think it's a fallacy for us to believe that the people here are all walking all the time. They're going to shop in this area, but this is not a completely all encased area. They're going to still shop in the rest of Bastrop. They're going to still drive to Austin. They're going to still drive to our peripheries. So again, I just want us to think about what problem are we really trying to solve. So we get to our discussion points and things for you to ponder. What were we really trying to solve? Did we want improved connection, or did we really want more streets? Or did we even know? And my guess is we probably didn't realize what that was going to mean in terms of totality and in terms of maintenance. And then asking ourselves, where should it apply? Should it apply in residential, or should it apply in commercial? And then the other things to consider in terms of long-term maintenance costs to the city. Right now, the council and I are staring down the barrel of a $70 to $100 million street maintenance plan. That's existing streets, that's not new streets. You heard the traffic impact study for all new streets that would come. That's developer paid, they would pay for the new streets. This is just existing streets from maintenance, reconstruction. So maintenance is a crack seal, making sure things aren't infiltrated, the base isn't being deteriorated. Reconstruction, we might have to do a minimal mill on top and some overlay, add some material and roll it, mush it down, put the black coat on it, and it kind of looks like a new street. And then we have full-on reconstruction. So that's a $70 to $100 million proposition that we are facing today with just existing streets. So I continue to ask the question, did we mean to add more streets? Because if we did, I got to figure out a way we're going to pay for it. And then there's the obvious. Pearl River has said that they have a 30 to 40% cost increase because of land that they lost in additional right-of-way, and not to mention the obvious, the additional construction cost. So I think there is a fine balance. I think there is an intent that we wanted to do. We wanted our retail centers to look different. We wanted our retail centers, I believe, to look more green. I think we wanted nice areas. I wanted to be able to walk through the center. I wanted to be able to sit under a tree if I needed to. The Pearl River example, this is a good portion of the B3. This public-private interaction space here, their detention pond, they've gotten creative, and it's going to be stocked with fish. So it's also a recreation area. This is a good creative, out-of-the-box, public-private realm discussion that the B3 goes through. Perfectly fine, so long as that's not a city-maintained pond, I'm okay. But I think what we were aiming for was beautiful spaces. Beautiful spaces. And do we accomplish that with more streets? And that's what I have for you, so we'll go back to discussion points.
Do we have any questions or discussion?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. First, thank you very much for being here during this time. Are we supposed to be looking at this in the framework of how we redefine or amend the current developments, or are we looking at it in the lens of all future development will have?
All future.
Okay, all future or both?
All future.
All future.
All future. Mhm.
Okay. Is there a comparable example similar to the ones that are downtown that would be closer to what's happening along 71, 969, or in Tahitian, where there will be more development? Because I don't know how much development will happen in downtown due to
To the
space
obvious.
space constraints and money restraints, et cetera.
So first thing is we're looking at this in the lens of the future development as it's coming through. I think there is a place for Pearl River, absolutely, just like there's a place for the Domain in Austin. Our code doesn't give you an alternative, though, and I think those things should be market-driven. If there is a developer who's wanting to do a much higher-end product, to be able to give the tools in the code that allows that product to happen. That's their risk and their return that they're trying to figure out. In terms of residential development, same thing. We have various lot sizes. The grid street pattern calls for narrower streets. Wish I'd asked the fire chief to come in here. Because often, for example, in Pecan Park, you'll see we don't allow parking on both sides of the street. We say parking only on one side of the street. The reality of it is when I have 3 police officers on duty, who's going to go enforce no parking on both sides of the street? And when there's an event and fire and police and EMS have to get there, those tend to cause issues. So I want us to look at it go into the future, and I want us to look at it what were we trying to solve? Did we, and that's really for today. What is it that we're trying to solve? I think that the downtown area and the Old Town District, if we could recreate that, awesome. Awesome. Some of those things I think should be private market driven. Did I answer your question?
So there's an argument currently about how property taxes have increased, and so there's some people who believe that commercial development will help us pay and keep our property taxes down because they'll help pay into the city. How does an amendment to this help commercial business to come here or mom and pop businesses to start here so the residents aren't paying as high property tax?
Ouch. Yes, there's a relationship. I mean, it's an obvious relationship. Sales tax and property taxes do get spread out. I would say the sales tax has a more direct effect because the sales tax is a general fund number. The general fund is, as I like to call, the burrito of all of the funds, a little donkey. It carries the majority of the weight. It receives money from all of the other funds just to try to balance itself. Sales tax is a direct fund to the general fund. So the more sales taxes that you have, yes, you're going to have a healthier general fund. I would say a good example would be first of all, we did the PDD. You guys approved the PDD, so that's good flexibility. That's why that doesn't put this grid system like on fire today. We need to make a decision. It's given us time and breathing room. But I would say relief in the grid system through some type of creative, either a PDD or we have wider block lengths or maybe even the elimination of those block lengths. I'm thinking about a daycare center that I was told on Hassler Shores didn't make. I mean, I could give you examples. They're anecdotal examples of what couldn't happen, didn't happen because of the code. Again, how much of that is the code and how much of that was our process in trying to execute this code? And I'll tell you again, I'm a firm believer that staff was learning it just as you guys were learning it. And we were trying to execute it as best we could without really fully understanding the unintended consequences.
I have some questions.
Yes, ma'am.
So when I'm trying to understand, where we're going to be in 40, 50 years, and we look at what's happening with Austin, we're talking about sprawl that's out of control. Can you tell me why, I understand that we've got some concern about high density because of trees and things like that, but how do you balance sprawl with high density so that you don't encourage sprawl?
So we've encouraged sprawl in this code.
How?
Because we have the densities that were allowed in this code, and because we have water and wastewater availability, and the tools that the legislature allows for us to enter into a development agreement where I can serve as far as Tesla at 969 and bring it down. Water and wastewater availability is pretty much the catalyst to all development. So we have MUDs going on right at the Travis Bastrop border. Those developments need city consent, and at some point will be served by the city. Because of those densities that are allowed, we're sprawling today. There's nothing that the B3 code is going to do to stop sprawl. There is a development today at the Bastrop Travis County border that will be in front of the council if it didn't already go to the council for consent.
Okay. And also, you were talking about rural codes, but the number, I can't remember what it is. Doesn't matter.
P1.
Yeah, P1. Are we talking about lots that are served with wastewater and water from the city, or since they're rural lots, do they have septic systems? And if they have septic systems, don't we have a rule about a minimum of 2 acres or whatever that number is, that you can't go past, you can't put a septic system except every 2 acres, or I can't remember exactly what it is.
Yes and no, you're on the right track. There are state statute rules and health rules. If you're on city water, your lot can be as small as half an acre. If you're not on city water and you're on a well and you have a septic system, by state statute, you can be 3/4 of an acre. Bastrop says 1 acre. It's a little misleading because in that 1 acre, I can have my house, 2 additional dwelling units, and still a storage. So I have 3 dwelling units that are ostensibly on 1 acre that I was trying to prevent by this whole lot size discussion.
I understand that, but wouldn't they still only have to be able to put in one septic system?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
It's the circular reference.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around this one.
So in prior codes and in prior thought processes, you had one septic system because you were going to have one house. And you might have an out and a barn, but typically those didn't have bathrooms, which is why you get to the 3/4 and the 1 acre size limit. With our code today, you can essentially have 3 dwelling units and a storage unit. So I have kept those lot size requirements. I have kept that 1 septic system requirement. It's got to be sized. I've kept those requirements, but now I've made a density from 1 to 3.
And what's the problem with that?
Well, again, those P2, those rural roads are typically more narrow with bar ditches and don't account for the traffic that's going to be generated by 3 dwelling units.
Okay. And you were talking about pedestrian safety in Burleson East. Can you go back to that slide? Because I'm confused about that.
Am I going, I'm going, sorry. Sorry, the forward arrow sends you back, so I'm totally lost. Oh, here you go.
So, yeah. Right, so when I look at the approved with variances, how is that different in terms of pedestrian safety than the one on the left required under the B3?
So in terms of pedestrian safety and the number of cars going through, not a difference. It's different than Burleson West, meaning you have more delineated walks. The areas in the pink are sidewalks, and they act as sidewalks. They're paved sidewalks. They have a tree lining and some lighting along it. So safer pedestrian walkways. Both of those are having to fight with traffic in and out of the parking lots, essentially.
I'm sorry, I'm not following you. You're going to have to cut me some slack.
No, you're
So
good,
tell
you're
me
good, you're
again
good.
what you just said. You understand? Okay. So tell me again what you just said.
Okay, so at the one on the right, the sidewalks are along the street.
Right,
So-
there's pink. That's what's marked in pink.
Sorry,
No,
the one
those
on the
are-
left, the
one on
blue,
the left,
the all
okay.
blue. Those are streets that have sidewalks and a streetscape to them,
Got it.
trees, sidewalks. So I am in competition, sidewalks and street, sidewalk and cars, pedestrian and cars, throughout the entire grid system on the left. The one on the right, I'm not in competition with cars except along Wagon Wheel. The rest of them are sidewalks.
I got it. Now I remember my question. So because we now have limited walkability, safety, because there's so many more cars. I mean, there are not as many options for pedestrians to get, to me, it just, there's a difference between street safety and parking lot safety. And it seems to me that we've got issues with the parking lots. I mean, I could be just looking at this wrong. Let me go home and look at this
Sure,
again and figure out
sure.
what it is I'm trying to ask.
Sure. So I took this example and I used the example of if I were to pull up into specs today at Burleson West. If I pull into specs today, theoretically there would be a road right in front of the specs all the way to Hobby Lobby that goes to the back, and then there's sidewalks and trees along that road. Still fighting with traffic on the other side of that street to cross to finally get into specs. I'm still doing that. Most of the traffic would have been behind the specs in the B3, but there's still that circular pattern of the traffic still trying to get in and out of the streets. So we're still in that situation in both of these pictures. The difference of the picture on the left, and I think that was a good compromise, is I can park here and walk along a safe designated path of a sidewalk and not have to walk in the middle of the parking lot to get to my car the way I do today at HEB or the way I have to do today at Target or various. You guys created good connectivity here where I'm not having to fight through the traffic grid.
Okay. Right. Right, so the pink is, or I thought the pink's not a street.
Blue's the street, pink is sidewalk.
Pink is the,
Sidewalk. Is sidewalk with the trees alongside it.
I got it, thank you. Okay, next question. You talked about the fact that you are negotiating, or that you have negotiated with some of the new development coming in where they're going to be responsible for maintaining the, or at least
So
partially
that's
maintaining?
one of the requests to Burleson East, and that is a request to the Rosanke track that we're undergoing is, we get it, there has to be street connectivity. We can't just ignore it. We're trying to relieve 71 and trying to relieve Blakey and Edward Burleson, but those should be privately maintained.
So why can't we do that with, why don't we change the code to make that a requirement and/or grant a variance when, or basically negotiate that with every new.
I love it. I love it.
So, I mean, we could change that.
Yes.
Right. So rather than throw the baby out with the bathwater with B3, are you suggesting that we look at different pieces of it?
Absolutely.
Or are you suggesting that we just do away with B3?
No, we need to look at
Okay.
specific pieces of it. There's still a need for pedestrian safety. We're not denying that. There's still a piece for connectivity. My point is the grid 330 or is it 720? And if it's something more, what can we get in return to ensure not only that the residents' interests are protected from a long-term maintenance perspective, but we're still safe. We still accomplish what we tried to accomplish. And so really the thought with the 330, and I know where the 330 came from, and they'll give you all sorts of history, et cetera, but when you go and you look at Bastrop, we're not really 330 grids. So if we're going to apply form to function and say this is what's really working in Bastrop, these properties have the highest value, we like the way this looks, then let's apply that. Let's be reasonable and apply that. Because had we applied that over here on the left, this street would have gone away and this street would have gone away.
So what is the time frame that we're looking at for revising for situations like this?
As long as you guys tell me. I'm hopeful that we can workshop it and then do a public comment period and then bring something in maybe the late September, October timeframe.
The only other thing I'd like to say is, as we're thinking through how we're going to change all of this or what we're going to change, I just really encourage us to factor in extreme weather events and how that's going to impact, concrete, how that's going to impact the need for trees, how that's going to impact water, how that's going to impact flooding. All of those things I think that we need to be serious when we start thinking about 20 to 30 years from now, because it's going to look real different in 20 to 30 years from now.
For sure. And so this is a perfect example. Pearl River is my perfect example. When I said before, we talk about financial sustainability, and staff will tell you the B3 code was meant to be financially sustainable from a city perspective, nobody else's perspective. But I will go to my grave saying we didn't think that through, because there is no sustainability component when you talk about floods, the amount of concrete now here that now has to be held in that detention pond, the amount of heat that is coming off those sidewalks, and the amount of trees that they took out, that is not environmentally sustainable. And we can talk about financial sustainability all day long, but what attracts people to Bastrop and what is on our logo are trees. Here's the pond. Everywhere along the grid system, there are sidewalks. All of that white is concrete. They've kind of shaded it over, but all of the white is concrete, as well as all of the parking spaces.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not getting how that's different than some of the other things you showed us. I'm sorry.
So no, you're good, you're good. What I'll do is I will calculate the amount of concrete here and the amount of concrete in Burleson East.
What might help is if you showed what's actually left that's green. There's not much green up there.
Oh, at Pearl River, yeah, no, they took it all down.
This grid is so, we like our green and this tight grid, the wide streets. What's our typical width of a street now?
Today, 20, 25?
Per the code, I thought.
In our
was 20.
neighborhood.
In the neighborhood, yeah, I'd say I'm on a downtown street that I measured, it was 30 feet, I think, 25 to 30 feet. But in the code, what are we looking at? 50?
40.
40, 50? Okay. So that's a lot of paving, it's a lot of concrete, it's not a lot of green, and that grid doesn't give you any flexibility, even when you get to odd topography. You're just locked in.
When we approved the BDD, right? I mean, you now have the opportunity
Yes,
to.
we have
yeah,
some
bring it-
flexibility,
yeah,
yes.
okay.
And then the other thing to consider as we talk through environment, we had to change our process to not allow a clearing like that to happen. You know, they gave us a list of trees that were going to be, that they identified as protected and heritage trees, but they got so far along the continuum in our own internal process, and we'll own that, that the land disturbance permit was issued long before the site permit was approved. So they're going to pay in, they're going to quote unquote mitigate, but
Yeah. A little too late.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. So am I correct in understanding that the same code applies to both commercial and residential as it stands today?
yes.
Is that common in other past experiences with other cities, or is it there typically kind of some space to take into account the unique nuances of a commercial space versus a residential?
They're typically distanced.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a difference in the code because they're entirely different products. Now, that was a code of 30 and 40 years ago, but we tend to get to more mixed use now where you have live-work units. And so it's a marriage of those two types of codes. And I think that's what we were trying to accomplish here, to be quite honest. And there are some good components, but you know, I think what we will end up with is not what Bastrop looks like today. And maybe that was the intent. It's just, I don't know in my heart that I think that was the intent.
So as we look to reframe, restructure, and optimize some of the existing codes, would your recommendation be to consider them as kind of unique use cases that we should be a little bit more flexible
And that's what the
nuanced more?
PDD will accomplish. That's why I'm not forcing you to look at a grid street and like go drive tomorrow and come with me and we're going to meet next week and we're going to make a decision.
Right.
The PDD has given us some flexibility to work through that. But I do want us to agree on some basic touchstone. We do think 720 is an okay number. We do think, 1,000 is an okay number. We do think there should be a minimum lot size, even if it's a 2,500 foot lot. All of those things to consider as we talk about how Bastrop both infills in some of those homes that'll be in infill development in Old Town, and then as we go further out. Because quite honestly, if we have another subdivision like Pecan Park, for example, with that many homes, and they come through, the number of homes could, ostensibly quadruple in the same footprint. And we need to make sure that our street, and if that's okay because the development meets the water and the sewer and everything else and they can make it happen, we just have to make sure that our street cross sections can also hold the increased number of the Amazon trucks, the trash trucks, and so we kind of left some of those pieces behind when we went through our grid. So we've got to make sure that those things marry and match so that I'm not every 5 years going to repair a street because of an unintended consequence of density.
Right, okay, thank you.
I would like to know how, because I live in Pecan Park, I would like to know how they can make those lot sizes smaller.
Well, we've got lot sizes in various, 2,500 to less in some cases.
I just don't know how they'll sell it if the lot sizes are smaller.
Yeah. 40 seems to be the sweet number. 40 to 45 seems to be the sweet number that developments, traditional, cookie cutter snout house. I call them snout houses. I know somebody says that y'all call them something different with the garage in the front. That 40-foot spacing seems to be the maximum density amount that they could get in old traditional. But in the B3 code, if you do something like a shared driveway, they can get a lot smaller. They can get a lot smaller. And that's my point is, did we understand that those were the unintended consequences of where we are today? And my suggestion is, when we have a development that is super dense like that, that it be treated a little bit separately, that it not be treated as a standard, this is what we agree and this is what we want in Bastrop, that it have special rules and it be required to go into a PDD, so that we are looking at a 50,000 foot, that it all marries together. And when we get to the end, we have a product that the people who live in are going to be able to get out and get in, and the toilets are going to flush, and we're not going to have, long-term maintenance issues down the road.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So I want to be sure I understand what you're going to be asking us to do. Are you asking us to ditch the grid system?
I'm asking you to take a drive,
Or are you asking us to modify the grid system?
modify.
Okay.
I still got to move traffic. I just don't know that I want that many streets. I hope that makes sense. And use the main example, for example, just go down there, and if you guys see an area of town and you say, hey, what is the grid to this, or what is the measurement to this, please send it to us. We'll be happy to do it. Doug, who's your new senior planner, will be happy to get those measurements so that you can kind of get a frame of reference of where we are.
Are we, do we still prioritize like density, particularly at the urban core? And are we going to have tools, I guess, when we remove the grid, or if we do, to encourage density?
Sure, and that's what I'm saying. The PDD is the perfect vehicle, because if there is and I'm thinking about the tiny home development in Austin. So if there is a development that looks and feels and has a need, and they can make it happen and that it works for them, then great. Let's contain it within what a PDD is, and let's make sure everything matches, as opposed to letting that be just the norm that's allowed. Because I promise you, I don't believe the residents here understand what can happen next door to them.
Do we have any other discussion?
One final question. Do we live in a world where there's a compromise of amending this grid system and pairing that with the traffic thing that we've been talking about from that one private company, where it's financially sustainable for the city and cost-effective to bring business here?
Yes.
What is that?
We live in a world.
We live in a world,
We
great.
do live in a world.
Can you expound
We
on that?
do live in a world. So, for example, if tomorrow, let me see, give me a development along the way. Let's say where Tractor Supply tomorrow comes and they get bought out by a brand new developer, and they're going to raise the entire area and build it from scratch. And HEB has now taken over. There's a place for HEB to look very similar to what we want it to look like, with trees and green spaces and walkability, because you can connect to Hassler, you can connect to the trail along behind to the dog park and onto Fisherman's Park. Absolutely. I don't think that's a hard thing. The facade match old Bastrop, which we're going to talk about that later on. I think there's a way, and if there's a mixed use component in that, there's absolutely a way. Would HEB need to build some additional streets as part of the traffic impact if we were to pass that? Yes, probably, because they'll need to get out more than Hassler, because we've already talked about how difficult it is from 71 to Hassler, and when you're coming under the, there is absolutely a way. I think what we leave out, and what wasn't in our toolbox before, is participation from the city. We have in our code developer participation, but we have developer participation for water and wastewater. So if they're going to oversize something, we do participate in the cost. There's transportation pro rata as well. So if they need to build a road, as other people tie onto that road system, they should get paid back. There's also pro rata for some of the other oversizing. When somebody puts something in, they should be able to tie on. It should not be our sole responsibility. So there is a good partnership that can happen. It doesn't have to be all one way or all the other. But when we just kind of dig our heels in, the residents lose, because the city's going to have to maintain it, or the developer, is going to build a shoddy product. So I think there is a marriage. I promise there's a marriage. But I think there's a marriage when there are options. If you force everybody into the same peg, you're going to get fights every step of the way.
Can you bring us some examples of cities that have what you want? So we could know what it is you're thinking you would like for it to look like.
I could. I mean, the domain obviously comes to mind because that's kind of Pearl River-esque. The Pearl in San Antonio, Pearl River-esque. And this is where I think the B3 was sort of heading. But I think where we ended up was something like the San Marcos outlets. No offense, because I like to shop there. But so yes, I can bring some
That'd
good
be great.
examples.
So we're talking about specific.
Today, your home.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking more in terms of what do we want the city to look like?
Oh,
Not a
I was
specific.
thinking grids.
Yeah, not a specific retail retail park. So if you could think of something that that we can visualize, because what I'm hearing is that when we went through this process before, we didn't visualize properly what it was going to be. So I'm thinking that if we could have some way to figure out what it is you're talking about in terms of visual, it maybe, I know it would help me.
Sure. That might take me a meeting or two. Today, your homework is to go look at the grids, go look at the existing streets and show me, okay, we think this is what quote unquote authentic Bastrop is. And we think this is what it should look like. Developments, commercial developments, not just in Bastrop, but the surrounding areas. We think this development works, and how do we marry that? That's your homework for today. So, and we'll talk about it again at the next meeting and the next meeting after that if we need to.
Well, I like the idea that we're recognizing that there's room for improvement and that you brought this to our attention. Thank you. We can move forward.
Yes, ma'am.
I do have one other question.
Yes, sir.
Just to go off of what David said, or his question, is there a way we can get any kind of numbers crunch to kind of get an idea?
Of street
the-
cost?
Yeah,
Sure.
with the,
That's an easy
Okay.
one. I can
Right.
probably email that to y'all.
okay, yeah. There's just a couple of different variables, I guess. Yeah, thank you. We have anything else? No? All right. Thank you. Okay, on to item 4B, discussion and workshop, the replat for EDC Industrial Park to include a regional lift station, force main, and wastewater main, presented by Trey Job.
Hey, Trey.
Hey, the mic's not on. There you go. So let me repeat that. I'm going to be your favorite because I'm not giving you homework tonight, right? And then we'll go into the location map here. As you see where the buildings are, that's actually the built-out portion of the industrial park. The remainder is what we're going to talk about tonight in the replat. It's approximately 98 acres that are remaining, mostly treed. We started this economic development about 1996. We bought the property somewhere right after that, and they've been developing this park slowly ever since. So, but now everybody wants to move here, so it's time to get cracking, right? So we're going to talk about this. So when we talk about the lift station and what's happening, this is kind of a small area plan, if you will. And this is what Doucette is currently designing for us. And let me just give you a little history. This is Lover's Lane. Right, everybody familiar with that? This is the school bus barn. This again is Lover's Lane as it makes its way down. This is section 3 of Tahitian Village, right? And just on the other side of the railroad tracks is the part we're talking about that's being developed of the business park. And the reason that we're talking about this tonight, the reason we're workshopping it, and we don't generally workshop a replat, is because this is a little out of our ordinary sequence. When I come and talk to you in the past, or someone else has talked to you in the past, we say, all of their public improvement plans have been approved. All of their drainage plans have been approved. There has been a public improvement plan agreement that has been executed and approved at council. We have all the bonds. Let's go ahead and move forward and approve the replat. We're going to do something similar, except this time we're the applicant as the city. So this is why it's a little out of sequence, right? So there's not a developer per se who's given us a bond. We've just already funded the project. So there won't be the same types of documents that you would usually see, which is why we wanted to talk about this. But let me tell you what we're going to do here as we move forward. So If you'll recall, just last year, we actually approved a zoning concept scheme for this area with this street layout. And let me see if I can magnify this a little bit. Nope, I can just clearly mess it all up. Spotlight it is. So just a few short months ago, the areas that you see in blue are going to be brand new streets, brand new sewer lines, brand new water lines, all of that good stuff. And this is a street layout that was approved here at the commission level and then at city council. There was only one restriction that was added, and that's a 75-foot buffer all the way around the edge of the park to give an extra buffer from the residential. That's been done. We'll talk about that on the replat. But what's starting to happen is we're getting people knock on the door every day about buying property inside this area that you just saw in red in the location map. So what we have happening here is Mr. Doucette and their firm are designing these streets, designing these sewer lines, designing these water lines. They're actually pretty far along already. And we're going to commission and build it. Not only are we going to do that as part of this agreement, you see in that corner there, that square box in orange is actually going to be a regional lift station. So that's going to allow us to develop the remainder of Lover's Lane, take sewer from the new, this is the edge of the movie studio property, right? And as you head further south, there's actually a 25-acre property that the city owns, another 75 acres or so that's up for sale, and we'll be able to serve utilities and everyone through this area. But again, this stuff isn't built, it's in design, and we have the money to fund it. So again, that's what we're workshopping it. Just to give you an idea of what the overall park will look like. So again, this is the existing portion on this side of the El Sierra easement that's already built, has buildings there, Jamco, things of that nature. This is the new piece. You'll notice that we're going to bring Jackson Street, extend it all the way down, tie it into technology. Technology will then poke its way into what I believe is Mauna Loa, right? A built section of Mauna Loa. And I noticed, you'll notice that this road stops at the edge of that lot. Well, the city actually owns that lot. So it's going to be right of way, and it will travel through and connect to Mauna Loa. So what that means for the folks in Mauna Loa and Tahitian Village is happy day, there's another way out. We don't have to drive all the way down to Lover's Lane and run into 3,500 cars in the morning on our way to take our kids to school, and we can't get our coffee drink fast enough, and we're all upset, right? And we don't want to be in the traffic. So it's really a relief valve. While I don't expect a whole lot of residential traffic to travel that way, because that's part of Section 6 and it's really not built out yet, it is an opportunity for emergencies and things of that nature. There was some concern originally about, delivery trucks and things making their way into those residential streets. I will tell you, the person that's dropping off something for the industrial supplies, they're turning around and going right back to the highway 99% of the time, unless we're doing some construction and we force them out a different direction. They want to get in and they want to get out. And the highest functioning intersection in the city is at 95 in Jackson. That's probably the best grade you can get. Traffic moves there really well. Not so much on the other side where Buc-ee's is at, but on this side it's great. So this is the overall lot. And what we're going to do is just give you a breakdown. And you can see now, as we get a little closer, this tract 1, that's that 75-foot buffer that you guys requested. All right? And we'll just keep sliding through the different lots. What is already designed, and when actually is going out for bid tomorrow, is this extension and this extension of the roadway here. That's a tiny extension of technology in what's going to be called Financial Way, and that's because this tract has been sold. And I don't know if you've heard anyone mention Mocha Financial. It's a project that's happened in the business park. The EDC sold the land about a year ago now, I believe. And now that these improvements are going to be built, they're going to come in and put a secure credit card facility. Basically, it's a call center where they're bringing about 200 people for jobs, and it's the security around the credit cards, basically. So it's high security, high fenced. Going to be great for the place, creation of jobs and things of that nature. But they're also part of this replat, and they can't build anything until this replat's complete. Again, this is just the remainder tracks. I think you're catching on to what I'm putting down here. So I won't continue to bore you with the details. But you'll notice this is also in Section 3, We've spoken to folks about purchasing these slots. We're not there yet. And I'll say the only big difference in the comment that I'm going to make first to the engineer that submitted this is this will have to have some kind of fire turnaround if that doesn't happen. If we don't make that connection, this will either be a cul-de-sac with a turnaround or some kind of hammerhead T. And we'll work that out in the next couple of weeks because we're going to bring this back to you for approval at the end of the month. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Are we going to be providing wastewater service to parts of Tahitian now that we're going to have the lift station there?
We will not. We share, let me go back to this map. That's a good question, though. The map that we started with here, one more. The city of Bastrop actually serves this area. We serve this area, of course, the studios, and we serve the 25 acres to the south. The remainder, and to the east here, belongs to WCID number 2. So they're the different provider. The only way that we would serve wastewater is they said we can't serve, we're out of capacity, city would you take it, and then we would do that if they would decertify. So the plan is not to serve the rest of Tahitian,
So,
just the piece that's in RCCN.
so do we have an idea of the amount of maybe people that could potentially be in this one location?
In the business park,
Yeah,
or on Lover's Lane?
no, not Lover's Lane, the business park.
So in the business park, as you see, we have it divided up into about 5 tracks, 5 or 6 tracks. I don't think we're going to see a huge number of folks. There's been a small amount of manufacturing. There's been some, not necessarily retail, but some shipping and it's mostly manufacturing, right? So there will be a few folks coming in for work, but I don't see it being overly crowded.
Right.
I don't have a number of people. I just have a number of lots. Now, we could, in a future date, turn around and take some of those larger 10 or 12 acre tracts and split them into 3 acre tracts, and it could be small, shipping businesses as well, and you would have an increased people. But the road network that's being built is for a lot higher usage than what's actually probably ever going to be in that park. Some of those roadways are 38 feet wide.
Okay. So while this,
38 feet? Pretty big.
yeah, that's why so while Doucette is in the design phase, right, for this project, have they taken those things into consideration with, especially like that lift station, right?
It's an excellent question. They
That's
have.
what
No, I see your water and wastewater brain working over there. So, yes, when you said Tahitian, let me clarify some of that. The section of Pine Forest 6 over here is in the city's wastewater CCUN. So we would serve that section, and I have asked that these lines be upsized to handle that flow. So you're right, it will come through the park, hit this proposed lift station, pump its way back. There's a lift station here now, right? So what we're basically doing is turning this lift station off, putting it over here, serving these lots, going to serve these guys as well, plus the park, and it'll pump back up and head back to the current plant.
Right. So, I mean,
But yes,
to somewhat of Judah's statement, I mean, I know we're not servicing that because that's still part of the county, but there is the thought of the growth in that area, right? So I just want to make sure in that we have that redundancy, right? Because we're slapping something else right there and then tying in.
we are, and we
Okay.
have, it's a little preliminary, but I've had some conversations. If this were to need additional capacity, it's really easy to take this and move back across the river with a separate,
Right, 'cause
right, and we would relieve at the big pump station here. So
Yeah.
we've thought about future build out in the next 10 or 15 years, what that could look like. We've only calculated where we're actually allowed to serve by law. If that were to change and just, for example, the WCID defaulted or went defunct and the TCEQ said, hey, city, you need to come in and take over this district, they already have their own wastewater facility. We would just run it, right? So we wouldn't need additional stuff. We might make some changes to the system to make it more efficient and tie into our system better, but we're not necessarily trying to take away their business. We just want to have business right next to them where we're allowed to.
okay.
So we've spoken about wastewater, but what other burdens would this development cause us? Transportation-wise, safety-wise, light intrusion at night possibly?
So we have they're going to have the same standard lighting requirements. And I think that 75-foot buffer will help greatly with that. They will have tree mitigation requirements, and maybe this is a good time to talk about Mocha. They're actually building as much into the landscape as they can. That's what folks seem to enjoy about out here, is they want to build in around the existing stuff. That's what we encourage. They don't absolutely have to, but if they don't, we talk about tree mitigation. What's that going to look like? This is how much it costs to cut that down. And if it's a larger tree, unlike what happened at Pearl River, which we mentioned earlier, anything 24 inches of above has to go through a certain process to be removed. We didn't necessarily get that chance there. We can own some of that, but I think you'll see that really the goal is going to be some smaller footprint buildings, a lot of trucks moving in and out. Transportation-wise, adding these extra ways in and out is going to be extremely helpful for everybody along Lover's Lane and the Tahitian Village area. I do think the trucks, this is, like I said, again, the highest functioning intersection. Not only that, TxDOT and the city have already begun working together on all of the intersections along 71 to do improvements, and those will be built into our transportation impact fees, which we talked about earlier. So what we haven't done is designed each intersection improvement yet. We've identified the problems. We're going to identify the cost for the engineering and the cost for the actual improvements, and then hopefully this year we'll pull the trigger on those and then start incrementally going from best to worst, worst to best, you know what I mean. Probably the worst one is the one we talked about earlier at Burleson Crossing, and that's already underway. There's already improvements underway for there.
So is this going to look like the industrial parks along Burleson Road in southeast Austin, or more like the tech village that's off of 183?
I have no idea what the tech village looks like, but yes.
It's going to look like the tech village? Because that's built into the landscape, and they purposefully.
That is the goal.
Okay.
Yes, that is the goal.
Yes. There had been plans to develop that other portion that would keep it from looking like that and make it look more like
Here?
industrial. But we have toad habitat, and I think it's been determined that's just not buildable, and it's better left as natural environment, trails, those kinds of things over here.
Yeah, that black line that you see here is the arbitrary toad line, right? So everything to the east of that is much harder to develop, and the elevations are 60 and 70 foot, and they change constantly. While you could build into it, it wouldn't benefit an industrial type use. So if anything happens there, I would think it would be built into the actual landscape.
And my final question is that, me personally, we have employees that travel Lover's Lane. And of course, we have friends with families that travel Lover's Lane. So how is the city going to help this development go like, hey, there are these other avenues to take, and these other traffic patterns to take? Because, Lover's Lane's dangerous, especially at night.
Yeah, all right, so what you don't see here, talking about the replat of this piece, is there's actually a funded and approved plan to bring South Street all the way across. So you will come up Lover's Lane to a point, right? And then you can hit South Street and go across if you like. You can go straight and go west to Austin, right? I don't necessarily know that you can go east and loop back around this way if you want. I don't think anybody's going to do that. They're probably going to take South Street, like I said, and they'll bebop, here, and they'll bebop through, hit this intersection and go out. That would make a huge, huge difference for this area. I also think these streets here will make a huge difference there and there, especially as it's going to be nothing but beneficial for the outside edge.
Can we see a proposal of what that might look like?
I have
just, some
Yes.
slight mapping, right?
Sure.
Because I've been sitting here, I'm glad you even said that.
Yeah.
Because I'm sitting here trying to figure
No,
out how are we really
it was
going
very-
to alleviate, right? People are going to want to see it versus us just saying it's going to work.
Yes, it was. So we're studying those intersections now. I have the preliminary hearing that says it makes a lot of sense to make these connections. I don't necessarily know if that's going to be exactly where they're at today, but I think it is. It's our best educated guess. Again, some of it takes property acquisition, which we don't have yet. But I think we're on the right page. But yeah, there's actually several other plans on Lover's Lane that I'd be happy to share at another point as they come in.
I guess I'm going to clarify my question. Is there going to be signage for those other roads for people going to said industrial park, like industrial park this way? And is that coming at the city's cost, or are there other methods of communication to get people to utilize these thoroughfares that are already built for said traffic?
So let me just ask to your question. Are you asking me, are we going to let the people in the lower portion of Tahitian know that they can go through the industrial park? Or are we asking from the outside, people that are going to build in the industrial park?
The people that will be delivering to, visiting, working at, or
Gotcha.
involved with the industrial park, are they going to be using the already current thoroughfares that we have? Or are they going to use the ones that are, like, maybe that's Jackson? I don't know.
Yeah.
Read it. The thoroughfares that are built for high-demand traffic.
We will, so as we build out technology at some point and connect into MLK and things of that nature, there'll be no truck signs and things of that nature that only, right? So no through trucks unless they have a destination, right? So yes.
Okay,
That would be-
you're wondering if it's going to be set up to kind of divert to certain specific traffic, right?
Yeah,
To go
99%
certain
of the
ways.
time, they're going to take the,
There's already hundreds of houses in that development. So how are they not going to be negatively impacted by potential truck traffic?
and that would be signed, right? So
Yeah.
there's really no through traffic for that area. It's not, I will tell you, because it's mostly residential there, I think they're going to use the roads through the park a lot more than, now somebody could absolutely get lost, right? And turn around and they'll end up on Mauna Loa or give it another name and say, how the heck did I get here, right? But yes, there'll be signage that's, no through traffic. The goal here is to reroute them right back out to 95. Yeah.
Do we have any other discussion? No? All right,
No more questions?
no more questions?
That's it for me.
All right.
Well, when you say city, I assume this is all BEDC driven, all approved and blessed?
Yes, it's all BEDC. Everything that we're talking about has been approved, right? It all started with the BEDC. What's happening now is the city's going to manage the project, right? Because it's become a capital project, we'll start the management of it.
Thank you.
That's it. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, Trey. All right, item 5, items for individual consideration.
All right, yes, final item for tonight. Are there any other future agenda items that you guys would like to have for our next meeting?
Can we put the sign ordinance on an agenda, or at least start with a workshop?
Yeah,
Okay.
yep, we can do that.
I know it's been requested, I think it's been requested a number of times, but
Yeah, I've been on this board a little over a year, and I think it's been requested 10 times.
Okay, we will, yes, we'll definitely talk about that. I think that is a fine option.
thank you.
Is there anything specific in the sign ordinance you'd like us to start with?
Well, I'd ask you, what have business owners around town been bringing? Because I know there was plenty of complaints in the past, but.
So the one I get the most is window covering. So the pharmacy, or they're putting information on the windows, and our glazing requirements is clear. That's not really a function of the sign ordinance. That's what we define as a sign, and we're trying to be better about customer service. I get a lot of questions about, for example, the Vibe Tribe sign.
Mm-hmm.
We seem to want artistic and murals and those kinds of things, but then we don't really allow it. So figuring out a way if we can incorporate art with signage so that, one, the intent is met, that there's a sign and you can draw people, but it's not so gaudy and it's not a billboard and it's not super uplit. I think there's a good marriage there. The length of time that temporary signs are allowed, and then the requirements for a sign, especially Vibe Tribe, for example. It's in a weird place because she doesn't have a street address along the street where the majority of her business fronts. We can't technically give her a sign there. So, but again, I think those are more process than sign code related. and we're working through those internally, but,
Do you feel this is an issue that needs to be addressed and reformed?
so we have a lot of folks who want to do the bandit signs and the big balloons. I'm not a fan of those. We can talk about that, but I certainly don't want a proliferation either. I think there are some things I can bring you, like monument signs and those things that are done tasteful but still attract business without it being the super floaty guy. Can I have a show of hands of who likes the super floaty guy so I don't offend? Or Councilmember Lee, or the banner, what do you call them? They look like feathers. That just tend to pop up. Happy to allow that as a special event permit or something like that if there's a grand opening or something like that, but that shouldn't be something that we allow by right. And then the proliferation of those little signs that advertise garage sales and those kinds of things, that's a code enforcement issue. I will go and look and then bring back the major pain points.
I think I heard a lot just over, it micromanages everything. If there's a ability to simplify and allow some individual creativity, is this?
No soup for you. I'll admit that.
I'd be fine with a workshop, just to understand some of the issues, or if we can have some business owners speak.
Okay.
No specific reform that I'm looking for at the time. But going back to the bandit signs, do we have oversight for things related to code enforcement on our board?
You do not, but you can in a direction to me if that's something that you want to bring back. Like, let's say you want me to bring back the number of code enforcement citations we've handed out for XYZ. We can certainly do that.
Okay, I'll revisit that. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a procedure question. I'm still getting comments from citizens about, we've had situations where a citizen wants to speak and they exceed the 3 minutes or they come to the edge, and I seem to... Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. I've been getting citizen comments still concerned about, or that were upset the way sometimes citizens have been addressed when they wanted to speak and that they were cut off, sometimes even when they were asked to be here. And so I pulled out my rules of procedure for the city council and boards and commissions, and I pulled out Rosenberg's rules of order. And I thought there was a caveat in there that there was some discretion with the chair on how long they could speak, because this does reference 3 minutes. And what is that? How do we handle these situations? Because we're here for the citizens, we are citizens, and I don't like that hostile relationship.
It's called the power of the gavel.
Yeah, I mean, there is obviously some discretion from the commission and the chair for describing or discussing issues that need to be fully fleshed out. So I would say that there's a kind of healthy medium for going above the 3 minutes. I think the intent of the kind of 3 minute cap is to prevent the, kind of aggressive comments and getting outside of the agenda item, as well as kind of the stirring up of emotions and, name calling or anything of that nature. That's the intent of kind of capping it or making sure. But as far as, citizen comments that you guys want to entertain and want to hear fully, you can perfectly allow them to speak beyond that 3 minutes.
Okay.
And you can also consider if 3 minutes doesn't seem like enough, maybe extend the 4 or 5 minutes, but just beware of, the power you give to the citizen as well, coming up and extending the meeting beyond a reasonable time. But I think we're pretty well within reasonable times every time we meet, so.
We don't usually see people go over, but once in a while, when it's relevant
Yeah.
and applicable to the conversation, then it seems appropriate.
Yeah, it's not a hard stop or doesn't necessarily have to be, especially for instances where it's relevant, but definitely a tool that the commission can utilize.
I think a good rule of thumb, Commissioner Long, or Koch, is to, when it's germane to a topic, so for example, citizens' comments, when they're broad, and please consider, those at 3 minutes, great. When it's germane to a topic, helping the resident understand that they should be speaking under item 9A, or perhaps there doesn't have to be a time limit because they are speaking specific to a topic that's germane to a discussion you guys are going to have or a decision you're going to make. So if a citizen comes up at citizens' comments and is speaking for 3 minutes, but they're really talking about item 9F, we should probably say, thank you, you're able to speak longer at item 9F if you'd like to come up at that time, because it isn't one or the other. They do have the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
We have anything else? No? Okay, on to item 6, adjournment.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Ah.
Yeah, I noticed it's very low, and it's not because you're not in front of it. I don't know what's going on, but. We'll get that figured out. David, did you second that motion? I'm sorry. Oh, Judah. Okay, sorry.